나는 저기 다 똑바 민주로 똑바 세다 dunjur 똑바 세다 다 똑바 된다 똑바 된미디스 이거 쉬르바다 민주로 똑바람나 된del야 민디 된디 통지 될래 민 어디에서 봐 타니 봐 자제 아니 근데 진비 똑바들라 민주로 똑바 세지 아니 dunjur 똑바랍디 아니 키시 아니 가리네 될래 키시 될래 아니 키슈지 자네 진비 똑바들라네 dunjur 똑바 세지 간수디 나 민주로 똑바다 dunjur 똑바 세디시 라디네 똑바 된디 세디 아니 똑바디 유디 진바 나신 된라 유디 여바이나 똑바디 된디지 안 똑바디 유디 진바 나신 된다라 오이니솔라 안 된디 유디 매바이나 되니 똑바디로 똑바디 미디세 한저 디시라다 쇼에
And this morning then we continued to look at conceptual consciousnesses, and we looked at the remaining two divisions, that being of conceptual consciousnesses that affix names, and there it was merely where a name is affixed to the object, and then the conceptual consciousnesses that affix meaning. And this is where the attributes are affixed, or attributes are affixed to the basis of attribute, or the specific basis. So for the basis, yeah. So attributes are fixed to the basis. So that is the fixing of meanings. And the second division was factually concordant conceptual knowers. So here the object that is apprehended is an existent, whereas if the object is a non-existent, the object that is apprehended does not exist, then that is a factually discordant conceptual consciousness.
똑바 된딘지 나래 유디 진바나신 될 여바텔라 똑바 된디들라 아주 제바 세마디게 차상 똑바 된디 책이로와 근데 제바 깨지니바다 유 토픽에 안에 돼서 차상 똑바 된디 제데 유디 도고 그래 다 똑바 이주에게 똑바 된디에 대해 유디 지다와신도 유디 모인의 수도 도고 말해 와다 똑바 된디 이주에게 똑바 된디에 나다 모인의 수 도고 말해지
Amongst the factually concordant conceptual consciousnesses, we find both inferential valid cognition as well as correct assumptions, as well as their subsequent cognizers. An inferential valid cognizer is factually concordant and it realizes its object. A correct assumption is factually concordant, but it does not realize its object. So what they both have in common is that they are factually concordant. We also heard that wrong consciousnesses are factually discordant because the object that they're engaging in does not exist. But then what about doubt? Because remember, with doubt, there are different kinds of doubt. So doubt, it being a conceptual consciousness, we can say is factually discordant.
분바 이나면에 말해 분바디 미다와 임마 다 쳐봐 은혜라 미다와 해도요 여러분 그래서 태좀되게 분바세야지 미다와 이나 미나 삼바인자 분바디 미다바다 미다와 마이베 니가 바 삼다지 거봐 니 제산 분바디 미다바다 삼바다와 나신 분바디 미다와 임바다 마이베 니가 레요 말아 사고 삼로 다와 나신 돈다 다다 차요 말아 매완서고 다 또고 되미딘로 차고래 다 된규기 태좀이나 된미규 태좀네 태좀 차상다 가소리 디차이로 가서 또버 된미팅이 나를 봐 뒤로 그래.
For example, if one is wondering, this pot, is it impermanent or not? So this is a doubt, and we know with doubt there are three divisions. So with those three divisions, when one is wavering between the two alternatives, one is either having equal tending doubt or wavering towards the one side or the other. But all three of these doubts remain factually discordant because one has not yet come to a conclusion that is in accordance with how the object exists, which is that it is impermanent. So even when one is wavering towards the factual, thinking the vase is probably impermanent, then one is still having the doubt as to whether maybe there's a chance it still is permanent. So therefore this is factually discordant.
다랑저 디지 쇼가 셰바나신다 또버 뒤미튼 세딩아 저기다 아저라 또버 뒤미든 멍보 이거 용거래 세상아 저기 딱받침배 따진디게 아 저기 뒤 딱받침바세다 뒤 딱받침바세는 그디나 뒤게디나 예디바서 삼다디 나저 뒤 딱받침바 따진 책거디 또버 뒤미든 책거 세상아 저기 삼로나라디 숙침보여래 아 저기 그래서 내가 가르쳐비나 아 저기 제 체시대 망원반에 봐 체시대에 아주 뒤 따봐서 진디거로 와다 소소라나디 무디네 내기 지금 내기래서 교화마로 다가라 하고 여버려 삼나 지금 이거로 와 제산디 뒤 따봐진 바디 따봐진디요 제산디 그 되미규르게 또봐 되미규르 차거래 제산 녀만에 봐 두여서 디지쇼 셰바나지 녀만에 아주 그 지게 두 녀마 여바디 다가랑 다디 나신 다디 지금 지가로 삼다려 배나 디 안에 또봐 되미든 차거 가서는 디 녀마디 기지기지 좋아서 유아신 좋아서 차와래데 다디 내가서 요말 아주 삼로디 지바로 진디거로 와서 진짜 디네자 디서 또봐 되미유르세 되미든 바 차요 세상 안에 저기 데니기 또바디기 안에 삼로 숙침보여 삼로 숙침보 디 이견지 안에서야 안에 저기 지게 내가 안에 지 체시디야로다 안 지가 지 권진제야로다 디는 거는 예마 미치게 소소야 직 제바이나 다디 미딜이야 나래야 디기 뇌기 소사야데 디니기 네 콜이야 뇌기 와서 비가 마가와지 권진 하디거로 당한 쪽에 삼다도 어디 예마 뇌바지겐디 다디디 미디 말고 그 균아마데레 제사데 예마 뇌바지 지사래다 균강 마치 균카가래 그 균지그레 마도 미디 카가래 가사 카가가서 균지바래데 이내 균예마딩 알뇌바지 조사래 롱에메갑래 제바래 다데가 미디 나데 뇌비기고 말해 삼마디니게 삼다바이나 예마기 나가지고 고용할 뇌바지다 지상에 팔이야 렌로인 셈이 콘진디 메바데 용야랴 용아쳐고 제사디니게 지부 미다바 삼다바이나 이 생기 라라 뇌바데 뇌비기 유디라 삼다 미다바 삼다바이나 아니 디니게 소소게 따바침베 따진들이야 녀보차야다 디니 녀보차야도 델이야 콘진게야 용을 차야 쳐고래
This morning we also spoke about the relevance that these divisions have for us. Because these factually discordant conceptual consciousnesses we have so many of. We need to start to recognize these within ourselves, because it's only through recognizing that a mind, or maybe you can here express it, an opinion that we have, is factually discordant, that we'll think, I need to abandon this. I'm not perceiving things in accordance with how they exist. And here we use the illustration, but I think it's good to come back to it, how we relate to time. We relate to time as if it were permanent. And we think about our future. We think we have this vast expanse of time ahead of us, and we have it broken up into a number of fixed periods, and we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that, and then we're going to do all these things. So we're grasping at our time as if it is permanent. Hence, we make these plans. Or to express it slightly differently, it's because we grasp at time as permanent, the plans that we make have the solidity that they do. Similar, with how we relate to the past. We also relate to the past period of time as being permanent. So this relating to it as being permanent doesn't mean we necessarily express the view that time is permanent, but the way that we relate to time that has passed is as if it is permanent. We grasp at it as if it is permanent. We don't relate to the passage of time as being something that changes momentarily and therefore has ceased, arises, abides, and ceases. We don't relate to it like this. And we can see that through the illustration that I gave this morning. When someone has done acted in a poor way, who has perhaps done something quite harmful, some time later, maybe many years later, when we think of that person or we see that person, we see them as that person of years before when they did this deed. And even if we haven't seen them for all these years, we see them as that person, and we hold on to them as that person. This is grasping at permanence. And as mentioned this morning, it gives rise to a number of afflictions, and in this case, resentment. And we have resentment towards that person, what they did, what they said. So this shows how we grasp at permanence. We haven't come to understand subtle impermanence yet. We haven't understood that, yes, whilst that person of a number of years ago and now shares the same continuity, we cannot though say that they are that person of 3 years ago. They are not that person. They were not that person a moment later. So as we reflect more and more on impermanence, and the understanding of impermanence grows within us. Conversely, our grasping at permanence reduces. And therefore, the strength of the afflictions and the frequency of the afflictions that come from the grasping at permanence, this too weakens. And in minds such as resentment that we hold towards others, these will start to dissipate as we come to realize, as our understanding of impermanence comes closer to a realization, the afflictions such as resentment start to dissipate.
네 교화 말어지 네기래 선배 삼로 쉬어 디 다선 차되로와 지난 디 다선 인자 딜로 또바 되미리 삼바 나신 맞아 되기리 별라네 되미데 땡데요 말이야 지상 안도 니레 교화 두고 그래 기지기지 교화 두고 그래 지난 교화 두고 봐자 아니 게디 매바 차그래 게디 시기레스는 아주 게디 봐도 마시베 되기리라는 아주 랍투에 가요 말이야 그래서 아주 치에기 끼에야 징엔 바시 먹는 거래다 내암다 중앙 추바다야 지금 마소라서 바다 나 칼라사다 마디비 진진 직제다 교화 딱 템부 되네 내게 말해 진짜 게디시 내봐요 말해 선배기 딱 교화 두고 그래서 선배기 삼로시 내야도 대신 아주 템부 슈 내게 선배 삼로디 슈 충주고 그래 진짜 다 충주로다 안에 딱 교화도 게디 교화도 제가 저게 경한 태제지 게디시 내봐 요말다 선배 삼로 레베나 삼로지까지 슈체 레베네 당하저 가르지야게 제지리기래나 키네 야게 지켜올랜도 디 야가지 용야랴 아니 디 용야게 제리디 제지 제게 삼리고 진짜 디 제지 제데 가서는 아주 계주 두비야디 류가 이스니제 되면 수름소야라서 받아 남니 베네셈바 상보 잠니죠 거면 데니게 삼다야 디기 진바도 수준 수비 냠는 제야디 디 제지지는 아니 게디시야 마다 진짜 마신이랑 디 직제지 제바이나 아니 게디시베나 겨야마 강아치 말했음 베게 삼라진 제지지야게 최제야고 냠는 제야도 고급지라고 그래서 세상 아주 최제야게 냠는 제야기디 아니 삼로디 교고다데 제고도 선배 삼로디 뒷바디 숙제를 두고 그래지 진짜 삼로나라 데니 균유부 되게 교화 조교바 삼마다지 게디네 무디 내기래 선배게 삼로디 숙천보라 지어베네 다 무드네 내섬데 무드네 내섬데 무드네 되네 영야게 돈달라 소소게직 체시티야다 레가레야다 되네 레가 망보라 삼바제 디도나 고고체 안 최체기 냠는체 고겁디 뉴라고 그러지 뉴아라고 그래.
The reflection on impermanence, we need to relate to all aspects of our experience, both towards ourselves as well as others and the world around us. I just mentioned then about how to relate it to others, coming to see that they are not the same person as they once were. We also need to relate it to ourselves in that way too, but also in terms of our lifespan. This is of great importance, because it's this grasping at permanence that leads us to believing that we have time. We all know we will die. We all know death can come at any moment. But that is merely intellectual. This is not anything that we are close to realizing. And it's because of that we make the decisions we do in terms of where we put our time and energy, what thoughts dominate us, what we value and hold as important. If we reflect on impermanence, in this context, in relation to our lifespan, we'll take the knowledge that we have and repeatedly think about it, coming to gain certainty of its truth, that there are so many causes that will lead to this life ending. Our death can come from the food, the nutritious food we eat. We can choke and we can die. There's a pandemic in the world. This is killing many people. It can kill us too. Many illnesses, some we may be afflicted with already and not know, they can be the cause of death. And something unexpected, an accident, could happen at any time. And when you think about it, there are so many causes that could lead to our death at any time, and there's so few that sustain it. So again, what I'm saying here is nothing earth-shattering. Everyone knows this. It's widely accepted. But to the degree that we haven't understood it, to that degree it has not had an impact on our values, on our priorities. But in dependence to how well we meditate on this, in terms of frequency, in terms of frequency and therefore depth, we meditate on this, we will start to break down this grasping at permanence. And our understanding of impermanence will start to arise within us, first in meditation, and slowly, not just in meditation, but out of meditation too. In this way, our grasping at permanence starts to weaken. And in dependence on this, the way we live our life will change. What we value, what we hold as important, will start to change. What currently dominates our mind, we will see in a different way, knowing that these issues are not that important. They have some importance, but we'll see them in a more realistic perspective. And we'll recognize that with this momentary decreasing of our lifespan, which means our death is momentarily coming closer and closer, or every moment is coming closer and closer, that what matters now is the practice of Dharma. What matters now is the accumulation of virtue. What matters now is the purification of non-virtue. Just that. And as our understanding of the Dharma deepens, we'll understand that this is how we need to apply our life, what we need to apply our life to, but not only on our cushion, but throughout our day. And as our understanding of impermanence deepens, we'll understand that Dharma practice means always being mindful, or being aware of our mental activity, as we see are presented in Lorig, always being aware of our mental activity, and when it's going in an afflicted direction, pulling it back, placing it on virtue. And in this way, we are able to practice Dharma in every activity, every activity becomes an activity of the Dharma. And in this way, starting with the reflection on impermanence, we become able to embrace practice at all times.
Control Bendigo and the Marik Pasia, then the Arzugular, Nyomo Beric Mambukiero, Tichaza, Topa Dumitin Chagore, Control Sadi, Topa Dumin, Carson Control Sadi, Michilo, Con Yudu, Control Sadi, Mazu Control Key, and Control Yudi, Chatham Gene, Dugjaru, Ton Dadigorwa, Chizan, Ton Nashin, Control Dugja Tawa Nashin, Yudi Chatham Gene, Dugja Reves and Dugja Chagomar, Chizan, the Control Digia, Topa Dumitin Chagore. 다 되자 되게 유지를 착과기 유디 차탐전에 지기 약보를 통하는 거래. 제가 대한 차탐전에 약보 차기를 해서는 약보 차요 말 통하나신 지요 말. 제가 디수 차사 또 받으면 되레스. 엔디나 지나도 마릭바 해야 된 다신 마릭바 해야 되기다. 디수 또 받으면 되레. 가서 마릭바 해야 돼. 다신 마릭바 생각도 나 해야 돼. 가서 수수 삼나 나요 돼. 가디 가르스 난 것은 강라에 마도 그런 행원이 랑공원이 줍디베 난 거래. 제가 디나와 나신 지가도 진고 진비 진바치요랑 가지고 진거래. 디 진바디다 여러베스는 진바 나신 가디 강라에 마도 랑공원이 줍디 여러베스는 자와기는 매바래. 제가 디니게가 라신 줍바 다신 마릭바 해야 되게 또 받으면 되레스. 제가 디니게 가지고 내가 망체대 가르치고서 당보 가지고 나세베 나진질이 걸어 당아세 다보 나세 끼는데 나 되고 나 참참 줘고도 나라 두로고도 나 칼라고도 나라 줘보고도 나라 변주고도 나라 왕아치 고고도 나로 좀 제고스 진행 디니게 당보 나서 좀 진행 디톤에 내가 망체 디네 채용 거래 진짜 디네 지금 봐서 나랑 쪽에 나세디 나나데 강라마 랑원이 두번는 거 나와나 신지 진되게 니 진비 진바디기 괜찮은 알아줄야 담보 나서 나진게 되네 네 세야도 망보게 되네 안에 땡알 지기는 알 뉴그스에 코라게야 띵알 고고스에 착바게야 안에 지게 알 연대 요선 되는 나야게야 그냥 고거다야 되니게 안에 지게 또 용하게 차사 알아주게 나 라신 주바 진바 딜레니 어제사디 교회 영상이 규조리 디레사지 당아서 조 오제제디 디치고래 진짜 디방바 있나 나 라신 주바 진바디 다 방바 있나 대방배 방바세 토요도 방송반에 타르바세 토두고래 되나 타르바 토바나 되네 동하게 자와 차상 방사를 동하 자와기는 야요 말레스 기디나데 띵이 대화장야로 해서지 다 don달라 디스토과 되미트시데 두수시네 다 또버 된변 자와디 다세 마릭바레 디메 봐서 그래 해서지 don달라 저 디시에 송야기 송고로 와다
If we look at the minds that arise so readily within us, perhaps at first we'll be quite amazed how many are factually discordant. And perhaps it should amaze us, because we don't tend to go around thinking that we are dominated by wrong consciousnesses. We have great confidence in the validity of what we perceive. But the truth is, our afflictions are factually discordant. And why is that? Because as we see here, their object doesn't exist. It's a non-existent. How so? So for example, when we have the affliction of anger arising within us, to whatever extent, whether it's aversion, annoyance, frustration, or full-blown rage, to whatever extent that consciousness of anger has an object, that object, the faults of that object have been greatly exaggerated. Because the faults of the object have been greatly exaggerated, the object does not exist in the way that we believe it does, and therefore that consciousness of anger or frustration or annoyance is factually discordant. Likewise, with attachment. When attachment arises in us, whether it's just a gentle wanting, to the extent of our mind being dominated by having to have something or having to have things go the way that we want, that mind, that consciousness of attachment has an object, and that object has aspects to it or features to it which have been exaggerated again. Its desirability has been exaggerated. The desirability of having to have things go away or us having to have a particular object has been exaggerated. And therefore the object does not exist in the way that we believe it to, and this consciousness is factually discordant. So this is the case with all our afflictions. They're all factually discordant, because they engage with their object in a way they don't exist. And this is, of course, true with our ignorance of self-grasping. This meditation we've done many times starts with seeing how the self appears, how does the I appear, seeing that it's independent and unchanging. It's not influenced by anything at all, and it's always been there without change. Then we investigate to see whether it exists like this or not. And we cannot find such an I at all, which means it doesn't exist in the way that it appears. It's factually discordant. And this is a particularly important understanding to come to in relation to all our afflictions, and eventually certainly to the ignorance of self-grasping. Because this is the root of all our afflictions. And how so? Attachment comes from the ignorance of self-grasping. Anger comes from the ignorance of self-grasping. Pride, resentment, all of them come from the ignorance of self-grasping. For example, when we believe that the self exists in the way that it appears, that self has wants, it has needs, it has things that are considered mine. There's the I, and there's what it associates with it, the mine. There is only mine because there is I. So here, this I wants, that's the attachment. I want to relax with my friends. I want to eat something delicious. I want. This attachment then, that comes from wanting, the I wanting, this I that does not exist in the way that appears, but we believe that it does. Then comes these desires, wanting things to go our way, wanting others to agree with us, wanting to get what we want, wanting everyone in the world to be in accordance with our wishes. Likewise, when we believe that this I exists and it's independent and unchanging, we believe we have these qualities which are qualities of this I, and seeing them, rarefying them, believing them to be permanent, believing them to be truly existent. Pride arises. Pride in these qualities that we have, these exaggerated qualities that we perceive. Also with anger. Because we have a sense of this independent, unchanging self, this is something we need to protect. Protect from the unwanted. Protect from those that disagree. Protect from those that we believe will bring harm. And trying to be separated from events or others leads to anger, frustration, and annoyance when things don't go the way we want them to. When we think like this, we see just how many of our thoughts, of our conceptual consciousnesses, are factually discordant, are not in accordance with reality. And this should be quite startling. It should be a wake-up call to us to take a close look, repeatedly, over a sustained period, again and again, trying to separate our consciousness from being factually discordant. In other words, from engaging with objects that do not exist. And to the extent that we develop wisdom, especially in relation to the self, we start to weaken this ignorance of self-grasping. To that extent, we'll start to gain freedom from ignorance, freedom from these factually discordant conceptual consciousnesses. And as they weaken, the ignorance of self-grasping weakens, so too do all the resulting other afflictions. So too then do all the resulting afflicted speech and behavior that one engages in. And we start to progress towards attaining freedom, freedom from ignorance, liberation from ignorance. And we should start here with looking at our consciousnesses, seeing what is factually discordant and what is factually concordant.
Topa dun se dan topa dun mi se de dinigi topa dun mi rik mangbu yores se san dan ngan zola moya de kares ne topa dun mi de ke moya res dan ngan zu kilo topa dun mi mangbu yore di sa me ba so ko re la go da de donala topa dun dini se de topa dun mi ko zimba na shi ta kara me ba ina di topa dun mi re di ngan zo moya re di dan ngan zu kilo di me ba so ko res topa dun 다 또버 된된디 가려면 또버 된된들 이주에다 제바 체마디게 여러분 또버 된된 이주에디게 또버 된들이 제바 체마 또버 된들 ndiso 당한지고 검제 yar겠단 거라서 아주 거야디 다 이주에디게 봐 검제 yar겠단 제바게 체마 봐 귤 제바디게 야네 야도 검제는 아주 제바디야 꽤매와 말고 또버 된메디 그 유도고래 또 도고래 이내 콜 된진나디에서 콜 꽤요래 꽤차지요래 지상다 디양 아주 검잡제 제바디 균매 봐서 균매 무슨 용어 유고레스 야 무슨 용어 줘도 받지 고레시래 다디네 무슨 나네자 다 원병 무슨 나네 무슨 나 약속에 가서 내주 무슨 돼 제가 두수 검지는 아주 셰바 차상 다 두아리게 차상 똑바 된미든지 차상 매봐서 똑바 된된디게 하바 검지 야게 따지 차상 무슨 용어 내주 무슨 뭐 줄도 받지 고레스 제가 디 제고 그랬다 두스제네 나 돈달 디시고르다 디나량아 저기 셰바나 똑바나네 똑바는 무슨이니 니나네 다 똑바나라 니나네 무슨에 야가 차고 그랬어 제가 다 똑바디게 차사 된미든지 차사 매봐서 되네 된디게 되게 야 검제 무슨 뭐줄 다 무슨 나네 무슨 시나네 무슨 나죠 무슨에 야쇼래 제가 다 무슨 검체야 나중에서 뭐 줄도 받고 그랬어. 제가 나중에서 뭐 줄도 그랬어. 제가 되네기 냠는 제디 당아주게 시비릭 되네 요래 제가 약속 뒤에 나 타말이야 딜레로 하고 그랬어지. 어디 두스제네 시고로 왔다 나중에서 써야 되는 간슬레기라 나다 먼저 신에 두고 그래라고 제가 신에 두고 그래. 제가 신에 두지 미받대 고면도 되네 아주 다음에 봐도 별로디 무슨 또비 제바도 검네 신내로 검네 나중에 뭐 좋아도 되는 거 조어도 셰바 그런 조어도 나중에 뭐 좋아도 되네 저기 네 디바 녀모 방야다 차산도 두스 되게 주야야 근데 고주고래 제래 나 돈다라 디레셔다 돈
Looking at ourselves, looking within, need to separate our conceptual consciousnesses into those which are factually concordant and discordant. The factually discordant ones, these are the ones that harm us. These are the ones keeping us bound in samsara. So it's these that we need to identify and eliminate. Those which are factually concordant, these we need to cultivate and grow in strength. Those which are factually concordant are correct assumptions, inferential valid cognitions. So our conceptual consciousnesses that are factually concordant are correct assumptions and inferential valid cognitions. These we need to develop and grow them in strength. The discordant we need to abandon. The way to cultivate and strengthen the correct assumptions into inferential valid cognition is to continue to hear teachings and reflect and meditate on those teachings. And in this way, we deepen our understanding on those correct assumptions. Eventually, with the correct assumption, where one engages in the object correctly but it's not yet realized, we will then eventually realize it through deeper meditation. And then we give rise to an inferential valid cognition where the object is realized in dependence on a correct reason. That is the process that we need to engage in. We develop correct assumptions and we strengthen them through hearing and reflecting and meditating. And then when we give rise to an inferential valid cognition, the great difference is the object is realized. It then has a profound impact on us. However, whilst we have now a valid cognition and a realization of the object, it's an inferential realization, which means the appearing object is a meaning generality. And as we saw last night, a meaning generality is permanent. It appears to us as combined with the actual object, and it appears to us as being the actual object when it's not, and therefore this cognizer, the inferential valid cognizer, is mistaken because of the presence of a meaning generality. So whilst we've done well to develop our correct assumption into an inferential valid cognition, and we've realized the object, we have further to go. We need to remove this fault, remove the fault that is the meaning generality, and that is done through continuing the process of hearing and reflecting and meditating. And here then, we will try and include the cultivation of calm abiding on this particular object that we are meditating on. And then, when we have calm abiding, the union of calm abiding and meditative insight on this object, and realize it, we will give rise to a direct perception of that object. In other words, no meaning generality. The meaning generality now has been, the object is realized, but not through a meaning generality, but directly. And when the object is one such as selflessness of persons, then we have achieved the best of the four of the direct perceptions, a yogic direct perception. This is the goal then. We go through all these varying steps, differentiating our conceptual consciousnesses into those which are factually concordant and discordant, striving to eliminate the one and cultivate the other, developing correct assumptions, developing them further into inferential valid cognitions, developing those into direct perceptions, and in particular, the yogic direct perception, which comes about in dependence on the union of calm abiding and meditative insight, realizing selflessness of persons. This is the process that we are striving to achieve, because this is how we achieve liberation from suffering. This is how we achieve lasting, stable happiness, a happiness that is never, that is unwavering, in that there is no even slight ripening of an affliction. Lasting, stable happiness is what is experienced. And that is achieved in dependence on going through the process, the map, as it is outlined here. I hope then that this is a bit clear now to everyone, because it's not the easiest of topics with a lot of new terminology. Now, so that now has been given over to you. It's for you to now put this information to work, to use it in your life. And the way of using it, of putting this to work, is to apply it to your mind. The work is all mental. And the way to apply it to your mind is to learn and to reflect on what you're learning repeatedly over a sustained period. This is the point of these teachings being given and of these teachings being received, to apply them to your mind through meditation. So now we can continue in the text, so page 17, to the number B at the top. So this, we had threefold division of awarenesses and knowers. Now we've looked at the first, so we come to the second, which is labeled as B, non-conceptual, unmistaken consciousnesses that take a specifically characterized phenomenon as their held object.
Adela Chinese said the Carson, Rangi Nayula Matu, Sana Jangi Ripa, said then Tome Matu, she be Chinese order, Rangi Nayula Matu, Sana Jangi Ripa, said the Nichilan Toma Matu, Sheba said.
So that's quite a mouthful, but the definition seems a little shorter. A knower having clear appearance that is unmistaken with regard to its appearing object.
Rangi Nangyu la Matu Seva, Corona Na Yu, Karinangora Sena, Coronalia, Dujiki Chushi Na, then again now and Ashin Delia Matua, then Sawa Nawaside. Now you do good the Jing and the Ranson Suyu Chipik Yu matches, and I had the Nangu del Carnos, Ngoboshin and Gore, Ngoboshi Naji, and Delia, Nang, you deny do Ngoboshi, now you do Ngobosh Na. And Delia now you do Tunjina Majava Sawa Nango, Resere. She's an Denigi Sawa Nan, the Rangi Yudu Zimpiki, Shebatella, and Garsore, Tome Matu Sheba like Recere.
If you've been wondering to yourself, what is a non-conceptual, unmistaken consciousness that takes a specifically characterized phenomenon as its held object? Here is its the essence of such a consciousness explained. So it's a knower, which means it's a consciousness. It has a clear appearance, which means there's no meaning generality. It's a direct perception, and it is unmistaken with regard to its appearing object. So we have here appearing object, in the title we had held object. So again, these are synonymous, held object, appearing object. And its object, as we see in the title, is a specifically characterized phenomenon, or as we usually say, an impermanent phenomenon, or a functioning thing. They're all synonyms. The object, the appearing object, is a functioning thing, or an impermanent phenomenon, and it's a knower, consciousness, that has a clear appearance and no meaning generality, and therefore is unmistaken with regard to its appearing object, which is an impermanent phenomenon.
And the nigger Tome Matu Shebatina, and Carres, long you doing jigs, the Monsum that Dondachibares, Donda, Monsum Labnada, Tome Matu Sheba Lamnada, Dondachibar, when you do that jigger.
And we see here that as the synonym for non-conceptual unmistaken consciousness is a direct perceiver, where we have directly perceiving awareness. So this is synonymous, and direct perception is how we've been, the term that has been used up to here.
Donda Chibares, Ngobo Chasang Mosumi Nayu Rela. Mosumi Nayu di Ngobore, Ngobo in Kurela, Chizatuna, Ngobo down, Mosumi Nayu, Donda Chibachadra.
The appearing object is a functioning thing or an impermanent phenomenon. So when you hear it with a consciousness like this, its appearing object is something impermanent, an impermanent phenomenon.
Monsumgi Zinda Udela, Takba Yungure, and Ngoboyon, Niga Yungure, Monsumi, Zindang Udela, Takba Yungure, Monsumi Yungure. In a Corona Udela, Ngobomato, Takba Yomarella word.
The appearing object is necessarily an impermanent phenomenon. The object of the mode of apprehension, or the engaged object, can be a permanent phenomenon, can be an impermanent phenomenon, it can be either. So the object of the mode of apprehension can be permanent or impermanent, but this is the object that the knower is apprehending or engaging with. The object that appears, though, this is only an impermanent phenomenon, cannot be a permanent phenomenon.
Tope Nayu de la Topa Korongi Zindang Yula, Moba Yora, Tapa Yora, that did Docha Chagor. Topa di Zindang Yula, and Tapa Yungre, Moba Yungre, Tama Yonchurva. In a Tope Nayu de la Tapa Mato, Mobokino Marella, Tope Nayu de la Mobo Tapa Janyares, Tope. Tope Nayu la Tapa Janyamato Mobo Mares, Topa di Zindang Yula, and Mobo Yore, Tapa Yungre, Tama Yonchurella.
What we're covering previously now in A was conceptual consciousnesses. Here we add direct perceivers. What they both have what they both have in common rather, is their objects or the mode of apprehension can be either permanent phenomenon or an impermanent phenomenon. So they both have direct perception or conceptual consciousness. For both of them, the object or the mode of apprehension can be either permanent or impermanent. But their appearing object is opposite. The appearing object or direct perception is an impermanent phenomenon, as we see here. What we covered before in A, conceptual consciousness, the appearing object is a permanent phenomenon, it's the meaning generality. It's a permanent phenomenon. So here, in terms of the appearing objects, these two types of consciousnesses, conceptual and direct perception, are opposites in terms of their appearing objects, but they are the same in terms of the object of mode of apprehension or the engaged object, in that that object can be either impermanent or permanent.
Di tongi to be jeba digi, Teda Antonio to be Najong Yorwa, Tongi to be Najong Mosumrava, Tongi to be Jeba de Toparava, Dinigagi Zinda Yudi, Tongi to be Najong Osum digi Zinda Yudi Garson, Tongi. Tongi to be Najong Osum. Digi Zinda Yudi Carelana, Tongi. Najong Sokorong Mosumrava. Tongi to be Jeba digi Zinda Yudi Garson, Tongi. C'est ça, Tongi to be Jeba, Tongi to be Najong Osum Niga Yudi. 동일에 따바래 진다 유대 따바래 니가기 진다 따바래 이내야 동일 또 배나종 웃음 되게 나유디 오버레스 나유 나종 웃음 동일 또 배나종 웃음 되게 나유디 오버레스 동일 또 배 제바 되게 나유디 따바레스 세상 군이게 나유 제바데 똑바인자 그 나유 똑바 따바레스 나종 웃음 되게 오버인자 가서 나종 웃음 되게 무슨 민자 그 나유디 오버레스 세상 권익이 진다 유디 니가 딱 말해. 진짜 나중 없으면 되게 나유디 오버래. 제바 되게 나유도 딱 말해. 사실.
So let's then look at the realization of emptiness. So emptiness is realized by two consciousnesses. By two direct perceptions. One being an inferential valid cognizer, realizing emptiness, and the other being a yogic direct perception, realizing emptiness. The first, an inferential valid cognizer realizing emptiness, this is a conceptual consciousness. The yogic direct perception is a direct perception. So both of them realizing emptiness. The first, an inferential valid cognizer, being a conceptual consciousness, it has as its object of the mode of apprehension emptiness itself, a permanent phenomenon. The yogic direct perceiver, that is directly realizing emptiness, has the same object of the mode of apprehension, emptiness itself, a permanent object. So thus far, this conceptual consciousness, the inferential valid cognizer, and the direct perceiver, the yogic direct perceiver, whilst one is conceptual, one is non-conceptual, they both have the same object of the mode of apprehension, emptiness, and it's permanent. So the difference in terms of the object comes with the appearing object. For the inferential valid cognizer realizing emptiness, the appearing object is permanent. For the yogic direct perceiver, the appearing object is impermanent. So that's in terms of object. The difference is for the appearing object. The object of the mode of apprehension for both is emptiness, which is permanent. But for the inferential valid cognizer, the appearing object is permanent, whereas it's impermanent for the yogic direct perception.
진다 유디 미다바 진거로 지상 그런 진다 유디 오버래 되래 미다바 또비 제바 미다바 그런 오버래 미다바 그런 오버 인자 미다바 또비 제바기 진다 유디 가르쳐 미다바래 미다바 또비 제바기 진다 유디 오버래 디나신 미다바 또비 나중 오스미 진다 유디 오버래 그래서 미다 니가 미다바로 와다 거니가 미다바 또비 나중 오스나 미다바 또비 제바니 거니가 진다 유 오버래 다 미다바도 나중 오스면 게 나유디 오버 다 미다바도 배 제바디 나유도 딱바레스 제가 제바 진다 유대 오버 있나요? 그런 나유디 딱바레스
We'll take another object, but with the same realizing consciousnesses. Two consciousnesses, inferential valid cognizer, yogic direct perception, but this time realizing impermanence. So the object is impermanence. Impermanence itself is impermanent. So here, these two realizing consciousnesses, the inferential valid cognizer and the yogic direct perception, both have as their object of the mode of apprehension an impermanent object, impermanence. So that they have the same. The appearing object, though, differs. The appearing object for the inferential valid cognizer is permanent. The appearing object for the yogic direct perception is impermanent. So there's similarity between these two, what we had in the previous segment and here. But where we see a difference is that in the previous segment, when the object was emptiness, that is permanent. So the object of the mode of apprehension for both consciousnesses was permanent. Here in this segment, where the object is impermanence, the object of the mode of apprehension for both consciousnesses, being impermanent, is itself impermanent. So that's the difference between these two segments, one on emptiness, one on impermanence.
Ngonsumye nayu de ngobo ingugures takwa yo mares da de ngonsumye nayu de ngobo kyanya ingugudla imba ko ngonsum digi yu takwa jimba yore ngobo jimba jinda yulo ngobo yore ne takwa yore ine nayu de ngobo ingugure ngobo me kapse jirwa dadi deji anzuge tonyu to be na ngonsum dela ne jinda yu de tonyere ina ko nayu de ngobo le la gorwa ndi na je na ngonsum 미다바지 맨날 정었음 되게 나유도 ngo보래서 그러와 제자다 ngosum게 나유들 ngo보 인구그래 랍칸데 수르라고선 도디베 송고 도디베로 다디디 셰데 또 도디베로 시자로 현주고래.
What has just been presented here is, as with this text, it's written from the perspective of the Sautrantika or the Sutra school. So they assert that the appearing object for direct perception must be an impermanent phenomenon or a specifically characterized phenomenon. The two Madhyamaka schools, those of the Prasangika and the Svatrantika, the consequentialists and the autonomists, they don't assert this. It's the Sautrantikas who hold that the appearing object of a direct perception needs to be impermanent.
나 이제 되네라요도 당한저 되시 쇼거에다디 지게 한저 기춘사디 나시 나중었음 돈이도베 나중었음 세디다 돈이 도베 나중었음 디게네 delea najong son tongyi nangre nang mare la yodu chisan dodi bege dele tongyi nang mare la gore tongyi tube najong som delea tongyi nang mares tongyi nangna ngosum dela nangna ngosum na yu charu gore che ngosum dela nangna ngosum na yu yim gores chisan tongyi di najong som la nana najong som na yu chagres najong som na yu na ngobo yingo la sa sa de jine ko ngobo yin la ra chi sa tong ngo ma ra dine za tong yi na jung tong yi tu be na jung sun de la tong yi nang re nang ma re se ji wa ta be na tong yi nang ma re la go re na ne kyun ga re yo re la na yang ji ji wa ta be na tong yi na na ngobo cha ru go re ka sa na jung sum de ngo sum ro wa chi sa ngo sum la nang na ngo sum yi nang yu che re ngo sum na yu na ngobo yin go re chi sa tong yi de ngobo ma ra wa chi sa nang ma re la go re.
So to go back to Tsepel's question earlier, the Sautrantika have to assert that because a yogic direct perception realizing emptiness, being a direct perception, its appearing object has to be an impermanent phenomenon, a specifically characterized phenomenon. And emptiness is permanent. So they will have to therefore say that emptiness does not appear to a yogic direct perception realizing emptiness. And that they cannot assert that it does appear because it's not impermanent.
This labna tuasngi di tingminuta. Carlos, najung osum de la tongi nangres, tongi di najung osum de la nang marela gora. Deji ko labta de la Carlos ne deji ngilade najung osum de tongi tube najung osum de la tongi nang marela sode. Odi remendo. De Carlos gora tongi najung osum tongi tube najung osum de la tongi nangores. Tongi tube najung osum la tongi nangores la. Tongi di tongi tube najung osum de la nang marela da. Ni dwa najung osum la tongi nangre. Tongi di najung osum la nang mares. Di lapsa kakaru je. And this is what tongi nyel lapse. Tongi nyel lapse. Tongi najung osum la nang mare la gorda. Najung osum la tongi nangre la gorda. Lapsa ro this is what koronsugi. Kebaru chigor. The answer is some bad Kevasha share meeting, some is a call Martin as a chibaru chatting.
What I just said wasn't quite right. They would express it slightly differently. And at this point, I have to apologize. I can't express it. But I'll try. So, that's me, the translator saying this. So what they're saying is that emptiness doesn't appear to the yogic direct perceiver realizing emptiness, as was said before. But, and then they express something which I don't get. So Genda said, they're really saying the same thing, they're just mixing up the words in a different order. It sounded like something like this. Emptiness doesn't appear to the yogic direct perceiver, but the yogic direct perceiver appears to emptiness. And that makes no sense to me, so that's why I think I must have misunderstood, and therefore what to do. But then Genla went on to say, they really, the sutra school here are just playing with words a little bit. The meaning to us is the same. So anyway, like that. Okay. This I can easily say because I said it now twice, so one at a time. So what they say is that emptiness does appear to the yogic direct perceiver. Okay. So to the yogic direct perceiver, emptiness appears. But emptiness doesn't appear to the yogic direct perceiver. So they're just changing the words around like that. Okay. So like Genla said, they're saying the same thing but just in a different word order.
Pending Churagi, Samanam de Nalaya, and also Totangi Dundela, Nana, because you did it, Ludilla, you did now you can Nani Toba de la most Toba like this. Manawaji Toba than Shulo Toba like this. Just you told on de la most Toba than Shulo Toba Nyungures. You did Toya Tilroa, most Toya China. Yudu toya de la mosu toya chida shulo toba nyungures. Chesa mosu toa labdi koron la yudi nangchi no toa kukures. Chesa koron la yudi manana mosu toa la mosu nang manana toa na shulo toa la kures. Chesa da mosu toa la kures. Chesa mosu toa la de nang kukures. Chesa na jo mosum dige tonyo mosu to togures, mosum no togures la de tonyi Dunjina Maja Sawa na you're going to Mosum Tiro, the Malaran, the Mosum Dunjina Maja Sawa na you're going to do a lagua. Chesa Dunjina Maja Nango Sawa, say we should Nango Larua, the Nango Latsarava. Chesa, then I join us into the Tonio Nangri Lago, Jumsenti Chagore.
The reason they need to play this the reason they play this word game is because they cannot say that emptiness is realized if emptiness doesn't appear to the realizing consciousness. In the text Paranavatika, valid cognition, that's what's it called. Anyway, something like that. The Sanskrit's Paranavatika. So in that text it states clearly that to realize an object directly, that object has to appear to the realizing consciousness. If it does not appear to the realizing consciousness, it cannot be realized directly, but it can still be realized, but only indirectly. So Sautrantika, if they don't play this word game, they end up having a finger pointed at them, asserting, you, through your approach, cannot realize emptiness directly, only indirectly, and then you're stuck. You can't progress further than that. So therefore, they play that little word game to try and get around that problem that they find themselves in.
Overchargura, Mosum now you check, didn't overcharge, Tony overchargura, or Tony Nangribella and Nangimares, and that's in the Lagoda, Tony Ladiniela Labche, Tony Najons and Nangribella and Nangimares, just on Tony Najons and Nangimarco Tapares, or she's a Nangimarella, the Lagonza, Taconozuki, Cousin Najonsum la, Tony Nanguore, in a Tony Najons and Nangimares, Zeneco Alora capture, she did some Gorua. Najongosum della Tony Nangore. Tony Najongosola Nangmare, said it. Tony Lavignele Labna Nangma. Najongosum la Tony Nangres. Miriwa. There are Najongosum Yele Lapcherwa, Najongosum la Tony Nangres, Yashilagorwa. Anybody Tony di Tony Yelabs, Tony di Najongasum Nangmares, like or what I did.
Again, the problem that Sautrantika find themselves in, and Seppel's question really brought that to the fore earlier, is that emptiness is a permanent phenomenon, and they clearly have here in their definition that an impermanent phenomenon is all that can appear to the yogic direct perceiver. So they have to say that emptiness clearly appears, otherwise there can be no direct perception and no yogic direct perception realizing emptiness at all. So the way they try and shuffle around this problem is they say, and I'll try and repeat what I said earlier, this word game they play, that the yogic direct perception, to that emptiness appears, but emptiness does not appear to the yogic direct perception. So through playing that word game, they try and get around this problem of saying that only permanent phenomena can appear to a direct perception, but emptiness is also directly realized.
Kariyu capture di ngi laba nala me lagor di jiware deji dus lab de laba nye laba nala kariyu capture ye la ro da dus ne kariyu capture di ngi laba nala me la se di nye lab che di ro sai ko de joa jesa de kariyu capture di ngi laba nala me la ro jisen toni di Okay. So I'll try and illustrate it with the lid of the cup on my hand. So if you say, on my hand is the lid, and then this is similar to saying the yogic direct perception, or the yogic direct perceiver, to that emptiness appears. Then the lid is not on my hand. Emptiness does not appear to the yogic direct perception. So this is similar to the kind of word game that they are playing. Di lau goya di kumcha karasana khonso ngosum na yono ngobo ingu guri ese khonso kelin yoba ja da di kanga thedu yorba da jisa tongi nangire labna ngobo charu guri jisa ngobo mare takpare ese ne kanga thiyo ja dine khonso dine sungo yorba da samnora chik shib saur tana kanda yona ngana zola chikpa ro chik mada shira khewa mede tongu minwa ngana zo samdana 나라서 삼다나 라바나로 유여세다 라하는 직바로 오지마도 알로제르메 된다 직바로 차도와 디나신 텐주바 직바로 와 텐주바다 란주베나나 직바로 와 나중었음다 낭랍나다 동이 나중어 낭라나 된다 직바 차도와다 나중었음들라 동이 나되네 동이데 낭고르마데 나요 말와 제자데 니가요 말에 텐주바다 셈에지 우마란주베서다.
So this is a problem the Sautrantika have, and they try and get around it like this, because for them it probably works in other contexts, but when the object is emptiness, so the object then is permanent, then they have a problem, because it doesn't appear to, according to their definition, it cannot appear to a yogic direct perceiver, but it has to, otherwise it cannot be directly realized, and that is stated in the Paranavatika. So they try and get around it with this word game. To us, it just seems like they're saying the same thing in different ways, but for them, it seems to make a difference.
ngoba yores na ngosumi nangyu ngoba yore mitakwa yore takwa yore niga yungures ngoba kyanja yungu mares la orda.
For the two Madhyamaka schools, the middle way schools of Prasangika and Svatrantika, they do not have this problem, because for them the appearing object can be permanent, impermanent, either. So they don't need to play any word game here. For them, an appearing object does not have to be impermanent, it can be permanent too. And then the text mentions the 4 divisions of direct perception or non-conceptual unmistaken consciousnesses. And so other than changing the word direct perception for non-conceptual unmistaken consciousnesses, these are the same divisions we saw earlier in the text on page 3 and 5. Sense, mental, self-knowing, and yogic.
That is Tome True Shabasire. Della Sumbe Singitilla, Sumbe Singitilla, Yawa Niche, Dambola, Rangi Nayula True, Sanachi Riva. Chezada, Rangi Nayula True, Sanachi Riva, said the Tome True Shabaset Chagore.
Then going on to C, non-conceptual mistaken consciousnesses that take a clear appearance of a non-existent as their held object. This is defined as a knower having clear appearance that is mistaken with regard to its appearing object. These are what we looked at, part of what we looked at over the previous weekend when we looked at wrong consciousnesses. So wrong consciousnesses that are conceptual and non-conceptual. So where we saw wrong consciousnesses that are non-conceptual, they have 2 divisions, and those we see here, sense and mental. So these are the same as part of what we looked at under wrong consciousnesses on page 14.
Adinegi, that Topa said, because one she said, Dumde, the Karsane, the Sheva, Karumbanai, one she said, and the Jike, this Shazan, and the Nigi, one she digi, the true Sheva, one she sucuba. The Yishizubala, Nanga, Nilam Yanalaya, and Nilam Yanana, Tarush, Nana, the Tangwani, something Nilam Sheva, the Yishi Inke, and the Tome Yishi, Trishi Chakurua, the Kazin Shevana Chibare.
The illustrations can be the same as what we looked at previously. So for a sense consciousness that is a non-conceptual mistaken consciousness, that would be seeing a snow mountain as blue, and an illustration for a mental consciousness that is a non-conceptual mistaken consciousness, that would be a dream consciousness where one sees the blue of a dream as blue.
That senior the rangi to mommy met again, one was Sujan Baletine, Gebaya yi, and rangi in Shitimba, Surada, the Angele, Tommy Trisha, Tommy Trisha Inca, one was Sujan Baletine, Gidugengi, and the Shebadi, that Tommy one Shisuba the chair. That Trisha Inca, rangi to mommy met again, you want it in a Gidugendi, that Tommy Trisha, the chair. And
then both of these are defined here. So it's many words, but again, it's what we looked at last weekend. So that which is a sense consciousness, that is a non-conceptual wrong consciousness, we can see here that it's a non-conceptual mistaken consciousness that is produced in dependence on the physical sense power, that is its uncommon empowering condition. And then for the mental consciousness, it's just the same, the uncommon empowering condition changes to mental sense power. So these are the 2 definitions, but again we looked at this previously.
And the Casata didn't count to topic or Sheva, Toba Della, and the Toba Dundun, that Toba Dun between says, Tangazu, Samnonalia, Toba Rigma, Maraki Ungures, Cesar de Nigger Toba Rictelane, 가소래 자식 양바 짐be 똑바 세야다 든지 양바 짐be 똑바 세야 니가 짐be 똑바 세야 돼 디술리고 이제 자식 양바 짐be 똑바 되게 유의되게 차상 무슨 유의도 또요 말했어 진짜 뭐도 봐 이제 자식 양바 짐be 똑바 되라 디 아니 가 저기 된다 유의디 된다 죽투 말해 세야다 진짜 디수마 먼저 곰진의 야게 다지야 아니 지게 체명호 유로 도와지고 그래 사실으로 어디 나신다 또뭐 되미든 나네 또뭐 되미든 되게 차상 하나 저기 매봐서 고야래 제사 디수 봐 빵고 그래서 매봐서 그래서 나도 또뭐 되미든 이 매봐 가는 세고래서는 아주 제바치 유디 제바치 또바티게 유디 진바 나신 하는 아주 유디 두에 미도 제바치야도 유용원이 수도 하고 용도 유디 또야도 아니 대신 또바 디 또바 너주를 샤스 하고야도 제 또배 유디 또배 참마데 개용도 아니 또바 대시 배나가 저기 리본고라 라주지 요래 삼제 바나 또바 쉬어베나 디 또바 되면들와 제가 당하지 마 요래스 당보면이 통데 리본고라 라 암초니 종로 라주도 섬 리본고라 라주도 섬지 통인데 또바 되면들 차들 제가 아주 마 저지 제바지 대샤 다지 리본도 파 주주든 라주 예매와 제가 디니 제바제도 다 라주 매바 통용도 제가 대시 라디오도 선배 똑바디 봐 예살다 요마다디 자원에 개배하래 다 그디나 다 미션다지 일본 갈 라디오 열선 어디 요마래 세네 땡이 다 취그랬으니 세네 곧 되네기 얘기네요 제상한 저기 제바제지 유용호 니수디 차상 세부 체면 또용도 아니 디 대시 노트 삼로디 디네 자와기니 개매야 차이거로 어디 나시 당하도 딱 받침에 따선 세야 돼가지고 진짜 마음속에 니만에 다라 유어기네 마도 유어로 삼다디다 만주 미지로 게디 나도 선 되기를 선배 삼다디 다생에 삼로래 진짜 또 버티미들이 다 디네게 가지고 제바체셰 아주 니만아지 다가 누에 민도 제바치도 당아서 락바락바 삼다 니만아 민 아미기도가 충충으로다 디리 로니만에 진 달로 체를 신에 되는 유어주 제가 니만아신 균이 민도아 선배가 삼로디 지기 땅에 대시기 디네게 삼로디 유어바디 뉴버충 매바 차도 뉴버충 줘야지. 자와기니 매바데 차도 말이디 내걸려야. 아니 뉴버충 줘 그래. 지나다 디네게 삼다에도 만 저기 유기 오 제바치 오니 수능이 수 통용도 안디 또버 되미딘디게 봐 뉴버충 줘야다. 아니 gelege 매바 차도야 최고. 제가 디네 인자다 아 저기 도 조디 디네게 또버리 망부요레스 제가 되미딘디게 아 저기 매바 쇠야라 제바치 유용원이 수도 통화 제고 그래서 직시고로 데네게 통내다 가지고 미다베 내수 세부 통야다 데네 지 레균제다 겨왕아치기 삼디게 세부 통여도 데네 가지고 취제하게 아니 고 냠는 제야야 셈쇼데 랑신이고 슉체주고 그래서
This weekend, then we've been looking at both conceptual and non-conceptual consciousnesses. What was newer and therefore important to summarize are the divisions that we looked at with conceptual consciousnesses. And these are of great importance to meditate on. So we saw that we have we can divide conceptual consciousnesses in differing ways. So we should get some familiarity with that. We've received information and we need to understand it well and apply it in our meditation. Seeing when we're giving rise to an understanding based merely on a sound generality or merely on a meaning generality, or when the two are combined, or when a meaning is being affixed or a name is just being affixed, or if our consciousness, our conceptual consciousness, is factually concordant or factually discordant. So these were the divisions we looked at, and if we've got some understanding, we need to utilize this understanding in our meditation, because we have so many conceptual consciousnesses, thoughts about things we've experienced in the past, thinking about what we're experiencing now. And these conceptual consciousnesses have a wide degree of error, from being wrong to factually concordant. So there's a wide expanse within and those two parameters, but what they have in common is there is a degree of error. That degree of error varies, but there is a degree of error. So this is what we need to investigate in our thoughts. See where on the scale of error we find ourselves. So if a particular thought, a particular conceptual consciousness is factually discordant, it's a wrong consciousness and it needs to be abandoned. And here we spoke about ignorance of self-grasping, attachment, anger, pride, resentment. These are all our afflicted minds are factually discordant because the object doesn't exist in the way that it is being engaged with. This we need to see. And this we need to abandon, because the clearer we can see, the clearer we can understand that we are believing in things that do not exist, it will be clearer to us that this is ignorance, that we are being governed by ignorance. And that will give us greater impetus to abandoning these ignorant consciousnesses. And others, which are factually concordant. So whilst there is still a degree of error, because the appearing object is a meaning generality, there's not a clear appearance of the appearing object, it is in the direction of reality. And these then, we need to cultivate and strengthen in our meditation. Hear more knowledge, apply that in our meditation, and in this way, strengthen our correct understanding of how the object exists, or how phenomena exist. And it's important we investigate on both sides, the discordant and the concordant. And the reason, it may sound a little strange to say, investigate things that don't exist. For example, horns of a rabbit. We all know rabbits don't have horns. But we use this easy to understand illustration so that the wrong things that we do, the non-existence we do believe in, we can apply that technique to that. So if we have in our mind that actually maybe a rabbit does have horns, it has these long things on its head, that could be a horn. Who knows? Maybe there is one. We investigate. We can look on Google. We can talk to knowledgeable people, and we'll never find a rabbit with horns. And then, no matter how many times the thought comes to our mind, you know what, maybe there's a rabbit with horns, you'll say, hang on, I've looked into this, they are not. And if we meet convincing, charismatic people who say, definitely there are rabbits with horns, how do you know they aren't? And you can say, I know, I've looked. That's the process. Going through life knowing that rabbits don't have horns, this is not so useful. But applying this to our various wrong consciousnesses, objects of our attachment, our anger, annoyance, frustration, our sense of self, this is important. So we need to investigate these factually discordant conceptual consciousnesses to understand the object does not exist in the way that it appears. And we spoke also today about how to use our grasping at permanence as an object and investigate this. So in terms of our relationship to the time we have left, this is important to investigate. Also, our relationship to our permanent self in terms of the time that's gone past. And give up grasping at things that we have done in the past that we regret. Grasping as if we are that person of X weeks or years ago. Likewise, when we come to realize that we are not permanent, but realize, not just intellectually understand, realize this, we will let go of this, of the perhaps the guilt that we feel about what we have done. Then we take this realization, we apply it to others. And we ensure that we start to grasp at others as not existing permanently. Come to understand they do not exist in the way that they appear either. That what they have said previously, done previously, or the views that they believed previously, those do not define them. They are not that person anymore. Even if they're still acting or speaking in the same way, they are still not that person from before. let go of that resentment. And this is the method to do so, to recognize these wrong consciousnesses or these factually discordant conceptual consciousnesses for what they are, and not allow them to influence us to the extent that they do, weaken them and eradicate them. And this way, as the grasp or the control that ignorance has over us starts to weaken, our factually concordant minds, the correct assumptions, these can start to have more of an impact, and we can develop them into inferential cognition. Start to live our life in accordance with wisdom, and not be so influenced by ignorance. In this way, through repeatedly over a sustained period making effort to meditate in the way presented here, we'll come to live our life more in accordance with reality and be less confused, less ignorant about how we exist and how the world around us exists. So thank you. Then we'll conclude here. The next time we'll start on page 19 with main minds and mental factors. So thank you very much.